Talk about units. We'll talk about metric, imperial, and why we use them. What's a unit even? So a unit is just a standardized amount of something, right? So if you've ever seen a ruler, right, looks something like that. Just pretend it's a ruler. And it's got all those ticks on it. Those are all a different measurement. You might see centimeters. You might see cm on one side. You might see inches on the other. So that's part of the metric system and the imperial system. Okay, so knowing what they are is fine, but how do we use them, and more importantly, how big are they? So if you're looking at a ruler, you might know this immediately, but if you're not, well, how do we figure this out? So let's break it down into the systems first. So first we have the metric system. Okay, this is the one that we use in Canada. This is one that most of the world uses. The US is the real holdout on this one. It's mathematically determined. It's got some nice factor of 10 properties that we're going to talk about later. But most importantly, it's easy to use. We usually use 4 of the common ones that we use here. That is the first one, the tiny, tiny one. If you think about a ruler, it's the smallest one on there, is a millimeter. Okay, and it is RE, it's not ER. So a millimeter, it's usually written as M, and that's about the thickness of your fingernail. So if you hold up your finger right now, look at the thickness of your fingernail. That's about it. Okay, next one up, the next smallest one on the ruler is a centimeter. And you'll see this with most of the metric units that they end in meter. We'll talk about that later. So cm for that one. And that's about the width of your fingernail. So if you look at your nail again, and then just look how wide it is on your pointer finger, that's about a centimeter. Okay, now we come up to the one that everybody should know, the meter. This is what's called a base unit. There's no modifier, it's just M. And if you were to look at a door, it's the distance from a doorknob to the floor. It's also about the size of your leg, but that's less than standard. Okay, and then finally, you hear about this one a lot if you go driving, it's kilometer or km. And it's about a 15-minute walk. Okay, so this one is for describing longer distances. You wouldn't measure this one with a ruler. You might measure this with GPS or some other tool. Okay, so that's metric. That's about how big metric things are. Let's look at imperial things here. Now, imperial, you probably heard of most of the imperial. I just wrote imperial. Mistakes happens, y'all. Imperial. There we go. Okay, you've probably heard of most of these, but the 4 that we usually focus on are inches, feet or a foot, yards and miles. Okay, so an inch, sometimes wrote as just IN or just a quotation like that guy. Inch is about the length of the last digit on your thumb, so the last digit on your thumb. Lots of hand reference here. Feet, sometimes FT, sometimes just a dash at that. Often in height we use that, right? So a feet is about the size of your, can you guess? It's your foot. Again, not perfect, but if you're looking for just an estimation, trying to figure out, wait, which one was big again, that's it. Okay, a yard, sometimes YD. is about the length of your arm. Okay, so your outstretched arm from your shoulder out to your wrist, that's about a yard. And then a mile, sometimes mi, is about a 20-minute walk. Okay, so bigger than a kilometer. Okay, so that's the metric system and the imperial system. Again, we mostly use metric in Canada, but there's plenty of things we use imperial for. If you're talking about height, like for example, Mr. Strong is about 182 centimeters tall. Okay, now if instead I wrote like 182 tall, you would have no idea how tall I was. You can guess, but really you wouldn't know, because if I said 182, I could mean centimeters. Could mean inches. Maybe I'm gigantic. Maybe I mean I'm 182 oranges tall. You don't know. If I don't use a unit, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if I use a unit, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for a lot of things, there is some measure of knowing how big something is supposed to be, so you can kind of guess what the unit's supposed to be. But in math, we don't deal with ambiguity. We deal with absolutes. Okay, so 182 centimeters tall, or 6 feet tall would be another one. That would be writing feet twice. Whoops. So 6 feet tall would be another one. Right? Again, we have that unit. Okay. In Canada, we tend to use feet and inches for height. So we're a little bit of a mix around here. So it's good to know all of these kind of referends. Okay, and that's what we call them. It's a referend. So when I'm talking about, how big is something roughly, I'm talking about this kind of thing. Okay? So we use referends like this to estimate distance. So when I'm talking about estimating distance, I'm talking about looking at something and thinking, well, that's about as big as, say, my arm. So it would be about a yard. Okay, so that's why this little bit of estimation is important. Estimation is an incredibly important part of mathematics.